Under the boardwalk, down by the sea, yeah, yeah. On a blanket with my baby is where I'll be. Ba-da. Under the boardwalk, we'll be having some fun. Under the boardwalk, we'll be falling in love. Under the boardwalk, we'll be eating some cheese. Under the boardwalk, yeah, just you and me. Under the boardwalk, boardwalk. Uh, You hear the smells of French fries they sell under the boardwalk and down by the sea. Yeah, oh yeah. On a blanket with my babies where I'll be burning down. Hi, everybody. Yes, as I said on the show, Great Lakes Federation, it's inevitable. It will be see, here's how I see it breaking down. The United States collapsing from from the center, as all great empires do. The decline of central authority to be replaced by regimes of regional authority, and I see that as you're going to have big swaths of just uninhabited area where people are going to be they're going to flee. The ones who stay are going to live in abjection, and those who get out are going to be rounded up, probably into migrant camps of some kind. Then you're going to have hugging the coasts, some concentration. But I think, and then maybe in like southern Florida, just the tip that gets like dammed up. You get like city states, like like northern Italy, New York, Miami, Caribbean ones. And then you're going to have a land based Great Lakes Confederation that's going to be able to hold a significant chunk of territory. Well, I think inevitably coming to some sort of political, I don't know, either a merger or annexation, or merger with or annexation of Canada. And then Canada, and then that Great Lakes Canadian Confederation can sort of be the new Holy Roman Empire. And then city states on the coasts. And then, a few uh, vestiges of like local authority, uh, dukedoms, baronies, as they call them in the Dark Tower. Texas would be, I think, will be some sort of, if we do end up with like a formal regime of like military rule, popular military rule, not just like a military dictatorship with no civil society, but a popular military regime. You'd have that most likely to emerge in Texas. But of course, a big chunk of that place will be literally uninhabitable, and they'll be at some sort of constant warfare to Mexico in some form or another. That's for sure. That border is going to be a blood bath. That's going to be just the Rio Grande is going to be running red. I think all those Midwestern states, are, the ones bordering the Great Lakes anyway, are really going to have to come together, get over their petty sports related conflicts, and become unified because they're going to come for that water if they aren't. If they are going to take that water, if you let the California, if they let them divide the Midwest, the Californians, fucking Colorado, whoever else, Arizona, they're going to take it. But if they hold on to it, that will mean the death of the Southwest. That's the thing. And if the Southwest dies, then the people are going to scatter back and probably be rounded up, processed in some way, turned into uh, economic units with less rights than people who are already living there. But yeah, they're gonna have to get over like Packers Vikings rivalry, all this petty bullshit. Oh, the Bears, get over yourself. Michigan, Ohio, shake hands and forget about the Toledo War and fucking Ohio State, Michigan. If there was some way that we could uh, cut Indiana out of it, that would be nice. But sadly, they're right there. They got a prime chunk of real estate there. But goddamn, Indiana, wow! Like if you look at the Great Lakes states, the outlier, the cruddy one is Indiana. And yeah, I know people say, "Oh, what about Ohio?" Whatever you say is bad about Ohio, multiply that by 10 million, and you got Indiana. Indiana, oh, the people talk about Ohio. It's like Ohio, because it's relatively large and it has that very odd German-esque uh, diffusion of urban areas instead of concentration. That makes it kind of interesting. It gives it different regional flares. Like Cleveland is a Rust Belt state through and through, or a Rust Belt city through and through. Uh, uh, Dayton is a classic overgrown land grant college town, and Cincinnati is a fucking southern state, basically, or southern city, essentially. Indiana is just, it has Indianapolis, which is the boringest major city in America. It's the only one not near some significant body of water. Architecturally brutal. It's just like, looks like a bunch of charging, like phone chargers sitting up. Uh, and then, of course, Gary, the most devastated uh, Rust Belt hellscape you could find. It's brutal. Indiana. And yet they got that coastline, so they have to be in on the deal. Annoying. They really shouldn't get full sovereignty, though. They should become a vassal. Don't say you can't hear me, smart aleck. I know that's not true. I know it doesn't just go out. So suck me from back. Now, California does have a lot of agriculture. They've got that arable land. They're fucking Ukraine. But if they need water, that's a different story. Now, the thing is, though, global warming has now changed weather patterns so that now, this last season, we have had significant sustained rainfall in California, well beyond historical norms. And building snowpack that's been lost over decades, if that is a semi-permanent feature, then California can really punch. If they can have some sort of access to their own water, and honestly, if California was like, okay, we're going to be a state, no fucking around, no more dicking around, we got to be a functioning polity. How are we going to do it? They really could, because a lot of that water that gets wasted, a lot of that water that gets used in California is used for the growing of cash crops like pistachios and and almonds in the Central Valley. You don't have to have those things. You can say no. Now, of course, we can't say no because our systems will not allow us to address any core problems with our system. But if if the knife of necessity gets to your neck, maybe holding on to a organized state supersedes keeping the fucking Central Valley farm families in clover. So, California, I don't think you can write it off unless there is a devastating earthquake that just cuts the fucking thing in half, which would be very funny. I think California is a contender. The Pacific Northwest, I honestly feel like that Vancouver and the Pacific Northwest getting pulled into a political orbit of China. If China is able to power project, like if we're assuming that America's fall is does not mean China has fallen, that China is still, you know, moving through Xi's plans for the future. If China is still, it would at that point be the new hegemon, and it would be able to make hegemonic influence. And I think it would be able to make its biggest alliances, its biggest influence in that Pacific Northwest region from British Columbia down to Oregon. And then California would, I think, be smart to become, not if not a vassal, a junior partner in an alliance. Then you've got the military uh, uh, conquest state of Texas. You got the climate wasteland belting a lot of that. Maybe Denver probably holding out as some sort of city state based on the airport. Pacific Northwest, Chinese bridgehead to North America. Then the the Great Lakes Canadian imperium there. The South, probably a bunch of small private regimes, like a a self-conscious attempt to reimpose like some sort of feudal relations, but it's just this sad farrago, and in reality, they're just cosplaying on top of the same uh, supply chain that the rest of capital is, and like the capital does still exist there, will still be doing that. The real question is what happens to the nukes? That is the most important question. The only real question. What happens to the nukes? And this is where I think the federal government does come in. Unable to govern in any meaningful way the United States, unable to compete with these new local forms that have emerged out of the collapse of the legitimacy of the central authority, you will have what I've said it before, the United States military as an independent force. I think at some point that military infrastructure gets taken over not by any of the competing powers in the continent, but rather is uh, decommissioned by the new Chinese-led global economic order. Now, whether or not that succeeds, or uh, there's a failure to collect all the nukes, then Katie bar the dang door. But it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. And none of us talking right now will probably live to see any of that. But we could. And if we did, this is the funny thing. This is what must be understood. The thing I'm describing to you. Well, from this angle, that's the post apocalypse, right? It will not be experienced subjectively as such. Because the parts that fall into apocalypse, the climate zones of death, and the liminal spaces that are contested over, the people who are there get written out of the narrative. They get written out of the culturally expressed subjectivity of Americans. They're off the table. Who the people still on the table are those who are surviving within these rapidly changing institutions. And while they might be changing rapidly by historical speeds, by personal experience, if you stay inside the zone of uh, law, if you stay on the right side of the Gambin blade that's coming to chop the Homo saucers and separate them from the citizens, if you stay frosty, your life is the same as it is now. You are engaged in the same basic job, the same basic relationship to capital, your neighbors, the same mediated, passive, spectative reality. And that's what I mean when I say the apocalypse has already happened and cannot happen again. Because we missed our chance to do anything collectively other than nuke ourselves. And that's why the nuke really might be the end of this, because pressing that button at a certain point becomes existential defense, survival against extinguishment, not of the self, but of the concept of self and the concept of the embedded world that you represent. Because we are locked in a ethos of debt, right? Everybody owing something to somebody. And our economy is driven by the settling of weight debts and the accumulation over time of debt, and also interest on the other side of the scale. Historically, cyclically, in pre-capitalist systems, uh, the in the ancient world, there would be periodic moments of jubilee where all debts would be wiped clean so that the social order could be maintained. Because if you have too much debt accumulated for too long and a continued expectation to have to pay it back, at a certain point, full alienation between the debtor and the deadee accumulates. A recognition that there can never be redress and never be a end to a subservient relationship emerges. And when that happens, you have people in violent opposition to each other and the social order that they're part of. The jubilee is necessary to stabilize that relationship and keep people moving through it. And when you don't have that outlet, your social order collapses. It happens everywhere. It's happened every time. The debt-based social order can only lead to collapse because there is no one in a position of power who can call a jubilee because they owe somebody too. There is no one who just holds the debt. The debt is held abstractly. The debt is held uh, by the machine. It's held in the memory of the machine. It is not a human possession. So that means all humans owe. No one can say, let there be a resolution to this. Let us have a jubilee, because no one can be forgiven. And since you can't be forgiven, can I accept being willfully deciding to not be on the top of the social pyramid anymore? Can I willfully step down and be socially dominated in addition to being dominated by the abstract algorithm? No. I would rather die on my own terms and end the human pageant uh, in my through my experience. Like if everybody dies with me, then I will avoid judgment now and forever in the minds of future people, because there won't be any. At least that's what you're hoping when you press the button. I mean, Putin is a very good case for this, because you've got a guy who is he's getting older. The COVID problem seemed to push his wig back a little bit and freak him out about his mortality. He's become a germaphobe if he wasn't before. He knows that full enthrallment, full surrender of national wealth, however you want to define nation, to international capital is inexorable. And NATO is just the tip, the material tip of the spear of it. It's a all-consuming process that's mostly happening on fucking in it's mostly happening in ledgers and books of account. And if that's the case, if you don't do anything, if you don't move off of your spot, you will be destroyed. Then you got to try something to validate your own uh, worth. What are you worth if you will not act at the final moment? Now the problem is that we have a subjective understanding of like how much danger we're in personally and existentially, that is not necessarily a reflection of the real threat. That is grounded by the comparing the notes of your experience to other people. And the higher up you get into a system like that, a personalist regime that has to hold in its person together all of these insanely destructive and termite-like contradictions of this state, this national project that is also just a pure oligarchy, then you're going to lose it a little bit, and you're going to decide I got to do something because even if it brings everything down, it will be on my terms rather than the terms because it is not defeat that we fear. Uh, it is conquest. It's not being losing in battle. It's being changed into a condition of servitude where a certain fundamental element of our sense of self worth and identity is taken from us by our consent to be dominated, which is what comes after defeat. Which is why if you launch a fucking nuke, you don't have to worry about conquest because it's all over. And so if they can get Putin to climb down here without launching any nukes, that will be a sign that maybe there still is a guardrail there, at least for now. But who the hell knows about the future? I'm vibing though because I really have detached my need for the human project as such to be continuous in my mind plausibly and for like life to have meaning. And I think that is a big problem is that people feel like if I don't believe that I'm contributing to a project that I can imagine extending outward beyond me for a significant period and transforming into something better and more than what I am now, then what was the point of anything? What is the point of anything? And I say the point is never made by that fantasy of the future. That is only a reflection of the life that you're living moment to moment. Like what you think you're moving towards or hoping for is also being reflected in your thoughts and actions in your life. So if you're like, oh no, it's not there, we won't get there, what's the point? The answer is it's here right now in everything. In every moment of experience has the potential to shine with that light, to reflect that eternal vision. And the actions that you would do with a belief in your heart that that thing will exist or a belief that it won't would be the same if you're attentive to what is happening to you now instead of deciding, oh, what difference does it make? It makes a ton of a difference because it's your fucking life. It's your fucking life. You are given the chance to be the eyes of God, the taste buds of God. It's an insane gift. And so that means everything has meaning. Everything is charged, brimming with breathtaking meaning. Every moment is. And your desire to imagine a future for humanity, uh, it's not as though that thing has to be made in order to mean that the thing you're in your heart is real. No, the feeling is the real thing. The sensation that drives you to act out of, hate to be cheesy, but love, that is the real thing. That is the eternal thing. That's the thing that, by definition, must have happened somewhere in some way that we are in touch with. And if they don't launch the nukes, well, then holy crap, look what happened. Wow, shucks. Now we've created a blueprint for future humanity in our in some small way, something that will echo. And I honestly think it will, regardless. But because you can't step in the same river twice. Like the reason for that there's this overwhelming despair is that we dethroned God as a belief in anything outside of ourselves, belief in the reality, like the fundamental reality of the subjective experience of others. We kind of got rid of that and we replaced it with a totally sensuous, personalized self that it might believe in God, it might not, but it doesn't matter because regardless, it is a fundamentally antagonistic relationship between the subjective individual and everything else, including God. God is unknowable and separate from us. That is the definition of any God that we claim to really believe in. And that's what fuels the. That's why modern religion cannot actually be the solvent, be the thing that reduces pain, the opium that Marx talked about. It can't even operate as opium. They had to switch to fentanyl, which is uh, sensational pleasure. Sensational pleasure is the sacred. Sensational pleasure is the holy. Sensational pleasure is what is to be sought. And that worked as long as there is a horizon of future greater sensory pleasure. Because we know it very quickly where the pleasure wears off because you're moving through time, conditions change, you're really just trying to ignore a hole in yourself, try to stack these things up so it gets old quickly, which means you've got to keep moving towards greater. The fucking hedonic treadmill. And that horizon powered capitalism across the entire globe, but now it has foreclosed. There is no way that you can promise anyone in the sensory enjoyment, pleasure, uh, uh, God seek and worship of the West. You can't, it's no longer powered by a belief that contribution and perpetuation of the system as it currently exists will provide you with that. And so now we're just in this uh, panic mode, banging against the glass cages that we all live in, frantic like fucking canaries in a coal mine. Because in the absence of that horizon, then you're only left with the diminishing pleasures of life and the increasing knowledge of one's own mortality and of the ephemerality of everything that you've spent your life pursuing. How do you deal with that gap? That is the famed midlife crisis. Is that emergent gap as you wear out, the pleasures wear out their welcome. And there is that the search for meaning is what's driving these religious frenzies that are now not religious anymore so much as political because we still only really believe in the sensory pleasure as a goal, as freedom, as self identification. We still believe in that. Uh, we just now want to change the system to give it back to us. So it takes this political turn like fucking QAnon. which is really is a consumer revolt among Americans who were like, I have completely absorbed the idea that the definition of freedom is my freedom to consume. That is, I've fully internalized that as the sum of my will to power is my will to consume. But I am now in a situation where I cannot hope to consume any more than I am or any more pleasurably than I am now, and in fact, only to do less so. This is unacceptable. I am going to stop it. And since I'm just an isolated media determined mediated creature, I'm going to turn it into a fucking a narrative, a fun story to tell myself to keep me from actually doing anything, which would take me off of the uh, treadmill, which I'm terrified to leave. And yeah, conspiracies just reinforce the consumer model because it takes you from a point of action, this system doesn't provide for me anymore, and turn it into, oh, here's why this story, and I have to now, instead of doing something about it, I have to go and read about this story and watch stuff about this story and then tell other people about this story. Because how do all conspiracy theories and the fantasy of the end of all conspiracy theories is not uh, people coming together and acting in any way. It is some truth coming to light and kicking all of our institutions, which have perpetuated all this awfulness, kicking them into. It's like when they take the Krusty the Clown doll and switch it so it's not. Here's your problem. Somebody put this doll to evil. Like they just take the institutions of governments, like Senate committee hearings and the media, and they just turn them into weapons for good because everyone finds out the truth. But everybody knows, as Leonard Cohen says, all this stuff. Everybody knows what they do. What they don't know is what to do about it. And focusing on conspiracies allows you to avoid that question. But again, it's entertainment is the thing, and that's fine. It doesn't work as a political organizing tool, and it needs to be understood that way. Man, I cannot believe that the Chinese ended the Yemeni war. Is that actually happening? Wow. I mean, it was in you look at it now and it's like, well, this was inevitable, wasn't it? Because you had a situation that was fundamentally untenable in the Middle East. You had these rising powers fueled by oil money, creating a regional conflict, power block conflict. Broadly, the Shia Crescent versus the Gulf states, but and like fighting over the Levant and stuff. And of course, then America's colonial outpost in Israel. This is obviously an incredibly important geostrategic region. It's got all the oil. The U.S. tries to. The thing is, the U.S. during the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were both sponsors of different states within this conflict. Uh, but many of the states themselves would play both sides against the middle to try to further their own more narrow goals, which is how these relationships work. Then the Soviet Union ended, and it was this unipolar thing where now the United States is supposed to be the arbiter of disputes that it is a participant in. Because, of course, there is the U.S. as a government actor with alliances and interests can't be administering these international institutions. That goes against the concept of internationalism. And that alienation builds at the heart of these relationships. And the United States becomes an absolutely a useless broker. It cannot be considered an honest broker in any negotiations. So the fucking all this stuff goes nowhere. China over there, so a guarantor of something because it's a huge. It doesn't have military bases in the Middle East, but it's a huge consumer of energy, and it has its own willingness to build energy infrastructure. So they are now able to come onto the scene without any previous alliances, without any assumed bad faith, and they can do things that the United States is, even though they're supposed to be the hegemon, incapable of doing, even if they wanted to. It does feel like, yeah, China's going to continue being a thing after the United States has stopped being a thing. Now, what that means, I don't think it means we get socialism. More likely, I think it means that humanity churns its way back down to a new equilibrium between human population, technology, and resources. I don't know what that is. I don't know what the ratio is. But then in that new arrangement, which breaks up previous political identities and concepts, although probably leaves, you know, geography as the print, place where people are now will be the place people are still in the future, even if there's fewer of them. And then out of that will emerge a new relationship between the individual, the social order, technology, uh, ecology. Now will it be just a return to barbarism with robots, or will the experience of having churned through the world as we have provide fertilizer to allow for new shoots to grow? I suspect that is how it works because it's how it's worked up until now. The only difference is that the human stakes are higher than ever because we now, for the first time, have a truly global economic and ecological end state. And we don't have an experience for that. And the totalizing nature of that paralyzes us. But the thing is, that totalizing effect, it masks the still significant domination of place and the existence of a space time that defines this dynamic. We forget that because we live so much in the etheric plane. But when that center collapses, energy goes inward everywhere. I'm looking forward to the Great Lakes Holy Roman Empire, I have to say, because it does really work. Like Ohio, uh, okay, let me think of this. What states would they be? I might do that. I might actually save this for the Hell of Presidents uh, wrap up episode that we're going to be recording, I think, next week. But I will follow up on that now. Then, but right now I'm just trying to think what would be the equivalence to the Holy Roman Empire within, like, what would Ohio be? I think my gut says Ohio is Saxony. Uh, Big, filled with medium-sized cities, no one big one. Uh, Known for partying. I think Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is Bavaria. Illinois is probably Austria. Chicago is Vienna. And then what would Michigan be then? Is Michigan the Palatinate? Maybe it's Bohemia. Ooh, yeah, I think Michigan's Bohemia. But I'll think more about this and uh, uh, display my findings uh, on the recap episode. I think California is Spain. Florida is the Italian city states for sure. You know what? I think New York is the Dutch. Same as it ever was. Back time is a flat circle. And New England is Old England. Pacific Northwest is France. No, I would say that the Appalachians are the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Uh, the wilder to the less developed areas where more formerly feudal regimes rule. Oh, that's interesting. The Appalachians as Switzerland. I don't know. Maybe the Ozarks are Switzerland. I don't know. Texas is Texas the Ottoman Empire? I think Texas might be the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, the Appalachians are the Balkans. That's right. Because they're not formally part of the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, Croatia was, and Croatia can be like Eastern Ohio, like by Athens, which is pretty Appalachian. And then the rest of the Balkans is yeah, that's the Appalachian, and then yeah, Texas as like a military expansionist state there to the south of them. That's the Ottomans for sure. Cajuns as their conquered janissaries. Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew Turner, 125. That's very good. No, Chicago is Vienna because it's the biggest city. It's dominant. Like Chicago is dominates the economy of the Upper Midwest, the same way that Vienna dominated the empire. Like it's the uh, imperial seat. I mean, and it wasn't as much of an economic domination, but that's because now we live in a more economically dominated time. So take the authority vested in the emperor in the Habsburg headquarters, and compare it to the commercial power that Chicago wields. Oh, Detroit, that's a good one. Yeah, Detroit, I guess would be Prague, maybe, since well, Michigan is Bohemia. All right, I'm gonna get a map of the United States, and I'm gonna draw it out, and I'm gonna decide who's everybody in the new Holy Roman Empire of North America. It would be funny if there was still a president during this period, and there honestly could be. And it's just like Matthew McConaughey Jr. or something. It's just a pure celebrity, and the elections are just a fun ritual that everybody participates in. But all the real energy is in local political rituals of one kind or another. And of course, I'm not going to make it by state. This is going to be chunks of states because it's not going to just be the big chunks on the map. I mean, even the American Civil War really wasn't like that. You do get a false impression when it's like here are the gray states and here are the blue states. For one thing, huge chunks of those gray states were occupied for the whole war, so they never even were under Confederate territory. Secondly, the upcountry parts of all of these states, meaning the counties up in the hills, in the Appalachians, in the Smoky Mountains, into the Ozarks, across even northern Alabama and fucking Mississippi and Georgia. There, the population was overwhelmingly pro-union, anti-secession, and disproportionately deserted from the Confederate Army, avoided service in it, or formed guerrilla groups to defend themselves against the Confederate forces. West Virginia seceded from the rest of Virginia to avoid leaving the Union. That's why West Virginia did it. It actually was unconstitutionally ratified, and they never even changed that. They never went back and made it legal. And that's like that sort of visualization does a lot to clarify what the war was about. So you take that real map of the Confederacy, these gray lowlands and these blue ridges, and you say, what is different about these two areas? And the answer is immediately clear. Plantation based slavery cannot and is not practiced in those hilly areas, whereas it dominates completely the economy of the low lying areas. And so, in places where the slave economy is overwhelming and dominant and hegemonic, you have political systems organized around hostility to the central government and eventual secession, where the social organs are dominated by people who are not planters and don't depend on planters for their livelihood, people who are, for the most part, small dirt farmers who have a hostile relationship to large planters as competitors. Those people had no stake in the Confederate system and resisted it and made up a decent chunk of Republican voters in the immediate aftermath of Reconstruction. A lot of those scalawags that are blamed as awful opportunists who helped the damn Yankees destroy the South were actually upcountry farmers who resented being dominated by some fucking fancy bitch in a fucking veranda drinking a mint julep. And that one of the big lost opportunities of Reconstruction is if there had been fundamental land reform and a redistribution of land to white and black landless farmers in the South, you could have built a multiracial, democratic political culture. Now, that's a huge if, and we didn't even come close to doing that. But there were moments, there were opportunities where that could have been pursued. The big one is not dispossessing the former slaves who had been granted land in South Carolina by the Sherman campaign through the South, which had all these uh, escaped slaves following in their path and wanted to be rid of them. Here, just take some land. That could have been the nucleus of a grounded, durable political culture. And if it had been joined by redistribution of land and resources to the upcountry, you could have had a situation where the best interests, the perceived best interests of poor Southern whites, specifically ones in the upcountry, who didn't have the experience of fighting for the Confederacy, could have perpetuated political power. But the entire project was sabotaged by Johnson. People want to say Johnson wasn't that responsible for the failure of Reconstruction because within it, when Congress comes back after letting him have that year for presidential Reconstruction, they immediately overturn everything he did, uh, and they overturn all of his vetoes, and they govern from that point on. But the year that Johnson ruled, the year of of presidential Reconstruction, was the most important year. The first year is always going to be the most important year, and it was completely controlled by this fucking asshole. This guy who bent over himself to let back in all of the fucking slave owners into control of government by letting them get their citizenship back if they asked nicely, because he was just a vain little tailor. He was a petty bourgeois bitch who was always resentful of below and above him, which is why the petty bourgeois is the poisoned, rancid heart of capitalism and what drives it to self-destruction. It's that position where you're below one and above another and resent and fear both, and have no solidarity for anything but yourself. And that was Johnson. He hated slavery because it made those slave owners think they're so much better than him. But that meant when he had a chance, all he really wanted for them to kiss his ass and say that they respected him. All he really wanted was their respect. And he had the power to extract it, and so he took it. And so he let them all back. He let all the slavers back into power, and then he took forcibly the land that had been distributed to former slaves. He sent the army to take them off the land. Those guys didn't go do that of their own volition. They didn't say, I'm pissed off seeing these former slaves have land. Hey guys, let's go down there and kick them off of it. They were following orders from Washington. If they had gotten orders to protect those former slaves from their white neighbors, they would have done that too. They would have gladly done that. These are the guys who killed all their friends during the war. You want me to go fucking rough them up? I would love to. And instead, he told them to go kick them off the land. And that you can't get back. And nothing that congressional Reconstruction did make that back. They didn't disempower successfully the planters. They did not take their land. They did not redistribute because they were fighting on terrain that had been created by the reality on the ground that had been created by Johnson's first year, which is why he's the worst president we've ever had, and it's not even fucking close. Because the history of the presidency, like all human history, is a presidency of overdetermined moments where all we really are left to do is narrate to ourselves why we did what we were forced to do. But then there are apertures and openings and moments of fluidity where chance enters in and individual discretion can dominate. And that was the American Civil War. And so uh, there was a febrile open moment there after the war, and Lyndon and Andrew Jansen comes in and just takes a big wet shit all over it. Like Buchanan was breathtakingly bad. He demobilized the U.S. military and supervised the handing over of U.S. military institutions and material to rebels. He was like doing, like you talk about what fucking Trump did, leading some yahoos to the Capitol where they could mill around and then get arrested. This would be like if Trump had let the Q people like into fucking NORAD and given them the nuclear football. But here's the thing: the Civil War was going to happen. Civil War was on the agenda. The Democratic model of placating the South had come to a point where it could no longer be sustained because the citizens of the North would not sustain it anymore. You want to know why it happened? That is why. What the Northern ambient voter was willing to put up with from the South had shrunk, and the demands of the South, as they felt the walls closing in became more and more exorbitant, extreme, because they wanted to break up. And that's why if Franklin Pierce had been 14th president and not Buchanan, I think he's the worst president ever. And if it's that fungible, I don't think it can adhere to the guy that much. But because like Franklin Pierce was a feckless dough face who only knew how to give the South what it wanted and had no other political heuristic to work with. And he was as principleless as Buchanan. He was also completely shit faced for his whole presidency. He might not even have known he was doing it. I mean, it's easy to forget this, but Jefferson Davis was James Buchanan's Secretary of Defense, War at that time. I'm sorry. Secretary of War was fucking Jefferson Davis. Guess what? He probably would have been Franklin Pierce's Secretary of War. That's overdetermined. Any other conceivable human on Earth that realistically could have been made vice president upon the death of, or been made president upon the death of Lincoln would have been better. Wouldn't have been perfect. We wouldn't be sitting in the clover now, but the terrain, I think, would have changed things in a positive way. And that makes Johnson just a world historic piece of shit. And when you consider how much happenstance goes into that, it's like, damn, maybe we do live in the world that has to, for reasons beyond our understanding, be where nothing ever quite comes together. How the hell did I get on the Civil War again? God damn it. Honestly, yeah, shitlord theory of history is pretty interesting. Instead of great men, like great man theory doesn't really work. Most of these guys are great to the degree that they embody a moment and then stop being great the moment that they no longer fit the mold. But pieces of shit can like just grind history to a halt and redirect it in dramatic and stunning ways. Andrew Johnson being a good example. In among U.S. presidents, John Tyler being maybe the greatest example. After So the Whigs emerge as the alternative to the Jacksonian democracy, and with them, the dream of a developmentalist merchant economy against the democratic vision of yeoman conquest. Because that is the heart of Jacksonianism: is every man will be a king on his own land that we will take from the Indians. We don't need to have taxes. We don't need to have banks. We just need to have our musket and our coonskin cap, and we just take what we want. We use the army to distribute it. Everybody is a individual citizen, and we get full liberty and freedom. We cannot be brought under the yoke of any power, including the money power. And the Whigs emerged among the specifically strong. The Whig heartland was not the mercantile East because there was a lot of working class people in the cities there that were Democrats. Uh, its real heartland was Henry Clay's home area of Kentucky, the western, what at that time Western United States, which depended for its sustenance on development, on building infrastructure, roads, canals. That was the only way it was able to sustain its economy and get its goods that are made to market. Hey, you want to be a bunch of yeoman farmers? Congratulations. Would you like to do something other than live at subsistence level? Would you like to maybe buy a nice Bible or a credenza or maybe some nice clothes? Maybe have some fucking seasoning for your food. If you want that, you have to be able to sell your goddamn surplus in a market. And the only way to do that is if we build some goddamn infrastructure. And the only way we would do that is if we circulate some goddamn currency through a banking system. I'm sorry. And so it organizes around Clay. They get their asses kicked by Jackson and Van Buren as think when the economy is going well, because as long as there's cheap land to sell, that means you don't have to raise taxes on anybody or tariffs because you can just sell the land and have that fill the coffers. Uh, and as long as the Indians keep retreating, we can keep taking more. And look at this, we won. We took the Louisiana Purchase. Look at this. We can keep going. Fuck everything. We can do it. But then there's a banking crisis that hits during Van Buren's term. Oh no, what's that? Oh gee, central banking. If you don't have it, you have these periodic busts that destroy the entire economy. Oh man. Oh geez, what are we going to do about it? And of course, Van Buren, even though he was a political genius, had no answer to that because policy was entirely secondary to politics. It's like, I don't know. I know how to get to be president. I don't know fucking know what to do about the economy. None of them did. And so they just did what they already knew, which was ideological and useless. And so America, even people who had the center of gravity of Democratic voters, were willing to listen to the Whigs when they said, "Hey, maybe we build a developed economy first. Instead of we hold back, we stop expanding westward, and we do some internal development." Gain value that way. Yes, it means circulating money, but it also means more opportunity. Now, of course, it also means capitalism, and it also means wage slavery and the eventual end of the yeoman dream. Now, what the yeomen who fought that didn't realize is that they were digging their own graves anyway. Uh, but at that time, they could still believe in that horizon, and they fought to maintain it. And the Whigs tried to propose this alternative, but they never ever got a chance to really carry it out, other than piecemeal in the states, things like the Erie Canal. And it's not a coincidence that one of the chief centers of Whiggery is upstate New York, Buffalo. That's where Millard Fillmore is from. But their one chance to actually govern with Whig majorities in the House and Senate was after the Panic of 1832, uh, and in the 1836 election, I believe, when they defeated Van Buren. But at that point, Henry Clay had lost the election twice. They were like, "You're not a vote getter. Let's get this handsome general, William Henry Harrison." And he was a real Whig. He was a committed Whig. But then they wanted to extend an olive branch to the Southern Democrats who hated Jackson and the Democrats because of the nullification crisis. And they got John Tyler, this Virginia planter. It's like, hey, these guys hate Jackson. Thing is, they didn't hate Jackson for any of the reason that the Whigs didn't like Jackson. They hated them because Jackson was too much of a centralizer and allowed for too much of a federal system and didn't allow local landowners enough leeway to control everything. So when William Henry Harrison becomes president, he was a real Whig. He was convinced about the ideology of the Whigs. He would have had, Clay as his political strategist. It could have done. They could have done something. They could have like pushed us in that direction. But instead, Tyler spent his term just ripping the fucking wiring out with the insane idea that he was going to get a second term, not as a Whig, because he wasn't one, but as the head of a specifically and explicitly Southern slave based uh, third party. He would be the head of a organized uh, pro slavery party that would dominate the South while the Whigs and the Democrats broke up the North. That was his plan. A solid South against a North and West divided between Whigs and Democrats. Never came into being, and he left after one disgraced term. And yeah, like the historical process that was all part of, you know, it was not changeable. We're not talking about huge realm realm of possibility, but what we are seeing is an individual guy just sticking his dick in the gears in a way that is very hard to find comparably for great men. So yeah, Shitlord. Yeah, Tyler, I think still has living grandchildren because after his was president, he became one of those disgusting old men who marries an 18-year-old, and he had a bunch of kids with her. Do I do I agree with Walter Benjamin that behind every fascism is a failed revolution? Absolutely, which is why I have a hard time using the word fascism to describe what's currently happening because that would mean that there is a revolutionary situation, either now or in the recent past. And since there isn't, it's very hard for me to use that term. But yeah, when the working class is defeated, class resistance to solidifying capitalism doesn't go away. It's just transformed, and the zones of conflict are transformed. So once the working class of Germany, for example, is defeated after World War One, and then split by the geopolitics of the Soviet Union and the uh, the contest between socialists and communists, while that's happening, the lower classes and the landowners, the small farmers of Germany, are coming together into a new class consciousness, which is the accumulated grievances of a bunch of socially atomized and fractured individual market actors. Yeah, but see, that's the thing. Somebody says 1960s. I don't think we were in a revolutionary situation in the 1960s in the United States. I think we were in a revolutionary situation in Germany in the 19 late 1800s, late 19th century, or post World War One. You're talking about armed contests with the state throughout the entire place. Like if all the armed rebellions that had occurred in Germany between the end of the World War One and the final collapse of I think like the Munich Soviet, if they'd happened all coordinatedly and at the same time, you would have had a real potential to seize power in Germany for that movement. I don't think any array of elements existed in the '60s. And so you've got so what is fascism? It is this lump of pissed off petty bourgeois and smallholders who are brought together not by any of them, but by bohemians and former socialists, overproduced elites, people who are outside of that relationship of social reality, but who can use their abilities as symbologists and as demagogues and as political artists. They can whip up a story that can capture them. Yeah, like fascism is not socialism. It is, but it comes out of the failure of socialism and involves the social vocabulary of socialism that those who had sought to challenge the state are left with after it has collapsed. And you can either go with one of the hot hand, the Socialist Party or the Communist Party. Problem is, things, those organizations are disciplined by their relationship to a class, by the fact that they do emanate organically from the working class, one way or the other. If you're a detached bohemian layabout, failed chicken farmer, socialist agitator, any of the people who make up the early fascists, arms dealing weirdo like Ernst Röhm, military flyboy and Lausch aristocrat like Hermann Goering, you're going to gravitate not there to the working class movements, but to building new ideas, building new vocabularies, and trying to entrance the middle with them. And then once you've whipped them into a revolutionary fervor, which is why, even though this all bears a superficial resemblance to the dynamics of politics now, the difference is there is no mass to be mobilized. There is only a techno regime of authoritarianism that is already here. What you're scared of exists now. It is not a eminence. It is not a threat. It is a reality. Your fear of that projected threat is your sublimated reckoning with the existing structures. Yes, the middle class is fake. The middle class is a media fiction. Mediated existence allows for the creation of this deterritorialized identity that pulls you away from your relationship to capital and redefines your subjectivity along property lines. Middle class, what does that mean? Homeowners. Not always, yes, there's urbanites in the city who rent and they trade equity for the excitement of living in the city. Fine. But it's fundamentally homeowners. And the problem is that once that petty bourgeois id is awoken, it will not end, it will not cease until it is destroyed. Because it is an unsheathed death drive, because it is life without meaning. You are trying to enshrine the middle class existence as the totalizing experience of humanity, an existence that is by its definition empty of meaning, can only be made meaningful through consumption, through conquest of others, that holds no meaning within itself. Once unleashed, that will destroy everything. The working class political movement, on the other hand, is nurtured by an identity that is defined collectively. It is, by definition, extends outward of the self, as opposed to bourgeois, petit bourgeois identity, which is aggrieved isolation. See, this is an interesting question. Is the middle class a social construct specifically designed by the ruling class to mystify the self away from capital exploitation? It is that, but I don't think you can say that it's specifically designed by anyone. I think the real powerful currents that have pushed us in the direction of what we are and have fixed us where we are no one's idea. They are the response of people to changing social conditions, operating from an assumption that they will maintain their social standing within a system. And those decisions will create emergent properties that fix us in that situation. Like in the early 1950s, we emerged from World War II. We got the Soviets there. What do we do with them? How do we relate to them? Do we continue the war or do we actually pursue a peace? That was the real question at the end of World War I. And the Cold War has to be understood as a continuation of hostilities. It's a continuation of hostilities. But that wasn't the only option on the table. The progressive wing of the Popular Front Democratic Party and the communists, fellow travelers of all stripes, large chunks of the most active base of the labor movement wanted cooperation with the Soviets and a true end to military production and a return to they wanted the newly created state behemoth that had won the war to be put to social uses with cooperation with the Soviet Union. And I do think that is the dream in the minds of people like Harry Hopkins and FDR. Yes, they were capitalists. Yes, they rescued capitalism from its own destruction. But they, in their own minds, did envision, I believe, some sort of eventual reformation of the end of capitalism, a euthanization of the rentiers, in the phrase of Keynes. I think they believe that. But they would have had to have fought for it, and the capacity to fight for it was not there, in large part because every other system within the American political economy was operating against them and working to neutralize them. Not because of a conspiracy, but because it was in the understood self interest of all those other actors, the Republican Party, uh, Main Street USA, Chamber of Commerce types, big industrialists. Everybody knew this wasn't good in the long term for them. And so they pushed where they could. And that meant red baiting against the labor union and the media with the Red Scare. But it also meant giving the rank and file something because the rank and file was politically mobilized and effective. So they had to be dealt with. And they were. And in so doing, they created this new middle class identity and this new spatial relationship, this new mediated subjectivity that obliterated their ability to act as self interested members of a working class. But not because anyone sat down and drew it up. It's because if you can't, if you're tired of fighting and you're coming home from war and you want normalcy and you want security, and somebody is offering you a quarter acre lot in a suburb because there was an immediate and massive housing crisis in America after World War II. There was no room at the inn for these GIs coming back. People were living in chicken coops in some American cities. So where are we building this where are we building this? Are we going to build up in cities? Are we going to build public housing in cities like the Brits do, where we have to go up against existing power structures? Or are we just going to take some of this fucking farmland now that we have automobiles, just tear it the fuck up and offer people a mannered dream, the upper class vision of autonomy married to the yeoman self-sufficient fantasy? Free real estate. And it's because that's what everybody has been pushed. That's the direction everybody had been pushed into by the reality of America's development out of exploitation of resources and real estate speculation. Real estate speculation. There is no it's no coincidence that our first president and our most worshipped public figure of the founding generation, George Washington, was a surveyor and land speculator who helped cause the 7 Years' War by killing a French officer in a skirmish while exploring land for a real estate company that he was a partner in. And of course, the real tragedy is that the Soviets were absolutely willing to play ball. But that would have led to war too. Can't be forgotten. But maybe along different lines. Maybe along productive lines. Stalin was good with it because his country was exhausted. I mean, they'd lost tens of millions of people to the war. Massive areas of land had been completely destroyed. Massive amounts of infrastructure had been completely destroyed. They were in no condition to keep fighting. which is why, it's like, okay, fair enough. But at the same time, you're also signing your surrender, which is what they ended up doing. When Truman got in there and told them in no uncertain terms, it's war, they they did not uh, realize the implications of that because they thought time was on their side. They really did. Everybody thinks time, when you're on the top, you always think time's on your side. And I think what we're dealing with now is a crisis in part because the people at the top don't think that anymore. Everybody doesn't think that. Nobody thinks that anymore. I will give Truman some credit for really like being a fully actualized demonic entity because there's a story about him meeting Oppenheimer after they dropped the bomb on Japan. And Oppenheimer shakes his hand and he's like, I feel like my hands are covered in blood. And then after the meeting, Truman turns to the guy who set it up and goes, don't ever fucking have me meet that idiot again. You're whining about the blood on his hands. I'm the one who pressed the button. I'm the one who did it. I did it. Like that is someone who understands that power is beyond good and evil. And Oppenheimer, yes, being a little dork. Somebody says, will there be a new party after the eventual demise of the Democrats? I used to think the Democrats were going to collapse, but with this suburban shift and the durability of it, I think you're more likely to see the Republicans break up, finishing off the job of the Whigs, because like they are in a real bind. They are risking becoming non-viable as a national party, which is what was happening to the Whigs. And with if that happens, then something else has to emerge. And the Democrats really own the center now. I know a lot of Republicans find that hard to believe. They say, no, no, no. Democrats are insane leftist loony people who want to cut your kids' dicks off. And it's like, look, that's how a lot of them like to present themselves on social media because it makes them feel radical. And I know that's how they look to you. But if you're someone who doesn't make politics their sole source of spectacleized identity, if it's not that important to you, and you're looking at politics relatively casually, like most voters do, you look like a fucking weirdo. You look like a psycho. And the Democrats, who don't talk about that stuff, like except for a few, people at the local level, you see very few national level Democrats uh, making it their business to talk about the culture war stuff because they're afraid of it. They do think that the average person is a fucking Neanderthal. They do think that, but that has the benefit of creating this asymmetry that regular people are alienated by. So that means that the Republicans are probably going to have to do some sort of resolution of this crisis because they're the structure of the party is more and more held by people who believe like that they are in terminal crisis, that like America is about to end, and that anything needs to be done to stop that. Uh, at a time when the people voting are less and less likely to want to endorse anybody who says we're going to throw the current order in the toilet because they're relatively comfortable. They wouldn't be voting if they weren't. The people who vote because they're not comfortable, uh, they're always going to be outnumbered because most people who are uncomfortable don't pay attention to politics. There's plenty of strong parallels between Marx and Martin Luther. One of the big ones is their invective hatred of anybody who they disagree with on relatively minor points. Uh, Marx had nothing like Luther and Marx had nothing like the hate for people who they disagreed with slightly, because they felt like, no, I have figured this out, and you're a fucking idiot if you don't get what is going on here. They were both very petty. And I don't think you can have that kind of productivity intellectually if you aren't petty to some degree at that level, because what they have in common is they're defining this concept. Like Marx and Luther both emerge to give voice to existing strands of thought that had not been synthesized yet. And so that meant that there were a lot of people competing with them for different interpretations of this moment. And they weren't going to let that slide. They were going to defend their version against others because they were in a genuine marketplace of ideas about the Reformation and about socialism. Germans, man, I still say it's something about the language. It drives you kind of crazy. Okay, guys, I'm done today. Talk to you later. Bye.